Welcome to the Resilient Philosopher, where leadership, psychology, and philosophy meet to explore the ideas that shape our humanity. I am your host, D. Leon Dantes. Today, I invite you to reflect with me on a question that is as relevant now as it was a century ago. What happens when the human longing to improve life becomes the desire to control it? In this episode, we will explore what eugenics really was and why its logic still survives, how CRISPR and IVF carry similar temptations, why psychological subconscious selection shows us as a different path, how time has judged the legacies of Henry Goddard and Carl Jung, and why emotional intelligence, not genetics, is what makes us truly human. Let's focus now on eugenics as the philosophy of control. You see, eugenics was not just a harmless idea, it was a social experiment born from fear and arrogance. In 1883, Francis Galton coined the word and called it the science of improving stock. The premise was chilling: some lives are worth more than others. By the early 20th century, eugenics had spread to America, becoming law and policy. The Carnegie Institution funded the Eugenics Record Office in New York, collecting genealogies to identify so-called defective families. Psychologist Henry H. Goddard played a central role. He added the Binet intelligence test to create hierarchy of deficiency. How this works? Well, for example, idiot, mental age under 3, considered incapable of any self-care, often institutionalized for life, and it comes from the Greek idiotes, which evolves to mean ignorant or stupid. The other term he used was imbecile, mental age between 3 and 7, capable of basic self-care, but never independence, from the Latin imbecilus, meaning weak. And then the third, which Goddard coined himself, moron. Mental age between 8 and 12, people who could pass as normal, but were judged incapable of sound judgment. And it comes from the Greek word moros, which means foolish. And Goddard wrote himself, we need a term to designate those who are above the imbeciles and below the normal. The word moron is from the Greek word meaning foolish. These were not neutral labels, as you can see. They were designed to demean. If Goddard had simply used terms like level 1, level 2, and level 3, he might have described abilities without condemning, but eugenics was never ethically neutral. The language itself was an act of judgment. This ideology led to forced sterilization laws in over 30 states. In 1927, the Supreme Court upheld them in Buck versus Bell, when the Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes declared, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. So between 1907 and 1979, more than 60,000 Americans were sterilized. Nazi Germany studied these policies and integrated them into their racial laws. Now, I have heard before the term an idiot and his own stupidity does not procreate. A moron multiplies. I don't agree with using those terms, period. And that phrase alone was what brought up this episode. Now, let's analyze the shift to a spectrum. Over time, professionals recognized the word like idiot, imbecile, and moron were never just descriptions. They were more like moral condemnations. By the 60s, psychology shifted towards neutral, personal, person-centered language. Today, clinicians use intellectual disabilities defined by significant limitations in reasoning and learning, limited adaptive functioning, onset before age 18. So instead of rigid labels, we now recognize a spectrum from mild, can often live semi-independently with support, moderate, needs consistent help but can learn self-care, severe, requires daily assistance, and profound, needs full-time support. This evolution reflects a moral truth. Classification should never be condemnation. Now we have the program called CRISPR. And this CRISPR, which stands for cluster regularly interspace short palindromic repeats, also as to cut and edit genes with surgical precisions. Yeah, CRISPR is a lot easier to use than all those clusters of words. But imagine preventing Hashington's disease or sickle cell anemia. The promise is extraordinary. So, but what happens when healing becomes an enhancement? Like in 2018, a Chinese scientist edited embryos to resist HIV. He was condemned, but the door was opened. When editing shifts from curing illness to selecting traits, the same logic reappears. Some lives are more worthy, some traits are more valuable. So CRISPR can go from changing the genes to prevent a disease from being spread, especially a genetic disease that is carried within that family, enhancing people. And that is a very fine line that crosses close to what eugenics wanted to be. Now let's explore IVF. IVF enables pre-implementation genetic testing, like PGTA screens chromosomes. PGTM screens for inherited disease, and PGTSR screens for structural issues. This can prevent suffering, but it also tempts us to choose embryos for non-medical reasons. When health becomes preference, preference becomes ideology, and ideology becomes eugenics. And to this, I can add that a friend of mine and his wife had an IVF procedure for her to get pregnant. And they did the testing, and I was wanting to know more information from him, how the whole process went through. And he said that at the end, they were asking him, for example, do you prefer having a girl or a boy? And his answer was, we only have the funding to do this once, maybe twice. I don't care the sex. I don't care the issues that the baby might have. What we want is the strongest embryo that has the highest chance of survival or being able to take on. And they went through the whole secrecy. They didn't know if they were going to have a boy or a girl, and they could have selected that. To me, that was where it went completely the opposite of eugenics. He didn't care for the best, healthiest embryo in the sense of health, but in the sense of actually taking and being able to be born. So it's the preference that becomes necessary to divide the ideology of genetics or eugenics and the reality that a life is worth, no matter the mental capabilities or in which mental spectrum they fall in or what possible physical issues they might have. And this is where now the psychological subconscious selection, as I call it, comes into play. See, it's the human instinct to find in others what we feel we lack. While Goddard was categorizing morons, thinkers like Carl Jung and Alfred Adler were building a more humane understanding. See, Jung called this process individuation, the integration of the conscious and unconscious to become whole. He believed each of us carry an anima and the feminine aspect of the psyche in men, and an animus, the masculine aspect in a woman. Jung wrote, for example, the anima is the archetype of life itself. He also taught the meaning of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. This is why we're drawn to partners, mentors, and friends who complete our hidden selves. Alfred Adler, also argued, to be human means to feel inferior. But for Adler, inferiority was not pathology, it was a guide. Our sense of lack drives us to grow, and unlike eugenics, which sought out to eliminate the defective, psychological selection sees limitations as an invitation to connect. See, this is why psychological selection is actually the opposite of eugenics. See, eugenics is about external control. Psychological selection is about internal integration. A person is not superior by IQ or looks. A person becomes truly human when they develop emotional intelligence, the ability to honor the imperfect and lead with compassion. So how has time judged Goddard and Jung, or even Adler? See, time has not judged these two legacies equally. Henry Goddard's work is now seen as an example of science corrupted by ideology. His tests were biased and unscientific. His categories were demeaning. His influence led to human rights abuse. Meanwhile, Carl Jung's work, by contrast, remains foundational. His ideas of archetypes and individuations are widely used in therapy, coaching, and leadership. Though not all his theories are accepted as science, his focus on integration and meaning has had a lasting impact. Time teaches us this lesson. Any science that forgets the humanity of its subjects becomes dangerous. Goddard's legacy is division. Jung's is understanding. Now, this brought me back an old story about a philosopher more than 2,000 years ago. Plato told a story of humans with 4 arms, 4 legs, and 2 faces. So split them into 2 to weaken them. Ever since, we have searched for our missing parts. See, he said each of us, when separated, having one side only, is always looking for his other half. CRISPR strives to design completeness. Psychological selection helps us remember that we were never meant to be whole alone. Today, debates among immigration echoes this same logic, that some people do not belong. Eugenics does not always wear a lab coat. Sometimes it wears a suit. When any group claims the authority to decide who is worthy, that is the beginning of selection, not psychological, but ideological. A person is not superior by IQ or by looks. A person is only human when they develop emotional intelligence, the capacity to see dignity in all people. When we accept that we are each a gear in the machinery of Earth, we understand nothing is superior to collective intelligence. Eugenics was born from fear. CRISPR can be guided by compassion or become the same illusion. IVF is a tool. Its ethics deepen our purpose. Psychological selection shows us that wholeness is not achieved by control, but by connection. So, lead with humility, question everything, and never trade your humanity for the illusion of superiority. And before we close, I would like to extend my thoughts and prayers to the families of the victims lost in Texas from the flood. It is truly sad that this happened, and hopefully we can learn how to prevent it in the future. Thank you for listening. I am D. Leon Dantes. Lead with resilience, embracing perfection, And remember, our shared wholeness is the only future worth creating.